The movie begins with a beautiful view of a lake where two men sit in their small boat fishing while conversing and laughing. In the background, a man's voice is heard monologuing, wondering if it was all worth it. He contemplates whether the effort and sacrifices humanity had put in to make those discoveries were worth it. The scene changes, and we see a spaceship approaching the Mars orbit as the pilots manning the ship communicate with the command center. After 256 days of flight, the manned mission to Mars had successfully arrived and was preparing for landing. While the dozens of people in the control center watch the descent of the ship apprehensively, the pilots report that everything is normal as they slowly enter Mars's atmosphere. During their descent, the ship encounters an unexpected storm that leaves the people in the control center in panic as they attempt to help the members of the crew. Frightened the ship wouldn't survive the descent through the storm, Alexander, the man leading the mission from Earth, begins to warn the crew about aborting the mission, telling them to stop the descent. When he hears Alexander's announcement, the head secretary whispers in Alexander's ear that they cannot pull back as he has already announced the mission, but Alexander ignores him. Focusing on the crew, Alexander informs them that they are forced to give them control, as they are having difficulty manning the ship from the control center, but the crew informs him that manual controls were down. Having no other choice but to pull out the crew, Alexander gives the order of their return, but the crew informs him that one man has to stay behind to perform the undocking, as the systems are already too damaged. Hoping to save his crew, Commander Sasha decides to stay back and activates the ship's undocking, allowing his men to return to Earth while he descends. After everyone had left, Alexander sat alone in the command center, hearing an interview he had given in the background about the mission they were about to undertake. Contemplating his lost friend, he remembers how he and Sasha used to dream about flying amongst the stars, but they could have never predicted Sasha would be the first man to walk on Earth. Collecting himself, Alexander calls a press conference to announce how the mission had turned out. He explains to the people that during the first stages of the landing, unforeseen circumstances caused a disaster. After reviewing the situation, scientists attributed it to an anomalous dust tornado. Alexander announces that to save his ship and crew, Commander Sasha has made a call to enter the module and manually unlock it, sacrificing himself in the process. Due to this unexpected catastrophe, Alexander informs them that the mission to Mars has been terminated. Meanwhile, in the control room, the remaining scientists continue trying to make contact with Sasha down on Mars, and to their shock, they get a broadcast back. Alexander is immediately informed about the situation, and he rushes to the control room, where Sasha's face pops up on the screen after a bit of static. Yelling for everyone to be quiet, Alexander addresses his friend, telling him that he had thought he was dead. A few minutes later, Alexander informs the head secretary that according to their data, the module fell and exploded, explaining that Sasha's survival was a miracle. Alexander also explains that only the laboratory section of the module had survived the crash. Alexander asks for more funding to send the next mission a year early so they would be able to bring Sasha back, but the head secretary refuses, reminding him of the $500 billion they had already wasted on the failed mission. The head secretary angrily tells Alexander that they cannot waste more money to bring one astronaut home. Meanwhile, a journalist who had been present for the press conference calls his billionaire boss and informs him about the situation, suggesting they turn it into a show, but the idea is shot down by his employer as he predicts no one would watch. A few minutes later, Alexander receives a call from the same head of the broadcasting corporation, inviting him over for a meeting. When Alexander arrives at the man's office, the wealthy man proposes that he wants to turn Sasha's story into a TV show and attempt to help him bring his friend back. Although he is upset at the proposal to turn his friend's life into entertainment, Alexander is desperate to bring Sasha back, and he agrees to the production. After returning to the facility, he announces to his team to check all module systems and make the necessary preparations for a rescue mission preparation. Calling a quick meeting, Alexander begins to discuss all the means to keep Sasha alive, as only 2 sections of the model remain intact. Meanwhile, Sasha activates the rover on Mars to give him and his rescue team a better idea of the module's condition. Sasha doesn't have much to use as supplies, and breathable air should only last him 30 months. The group decided that it would take 190 days to launch the rescue mission, as the phases of Earth and Mars would be in sync. Getting up from her seat, the team's psychological expert advises that they must warn Sasha of the taxing mental symptoms that he might experience during months of loneliness. During his stay in the module, Sasha begins to feel loneliness as he waits to be rescued. While he is sitting in silence, the team's psychiatrist appears on the screen and begins to speak to him, asking him how he is feeling. Realizing that she assumed that he would lose his mind, Sasha tells her that he is okay. After the agreement for the start of the show, the production company takes over the command center, adjusting the interior to fit their audience. Alexander continues to feel uncomfortable about the show, as he feels like it is taking away from how serious the situation is, but has no other choice than to play along. Once the agreements were made and it was announced to the public, the production team took over the command center, turning it into a studio that would appeal to the audience. Upset by the changes, Alexander calls Ramon, the owner of the production, and informs him about what is happening, but Ramon manipulates him by telling him he was doing all this for his friend, Sasha. A day before the shoot is supposed to begin, the production team tries to coach Sasha on the matter, telling him that he needs to try and make a good show to get the people to watch. The following day, the facility is made to accommodate audiences and set up with large screens so they can see streaming coming from the rover on Mars and the camera inside Sasha's room. After a brief introduction by the host, Sasha pops on camera and begins to talk about his experience on Mars, narrating the conditions of the strange planet. After his first shoot, Sasha is taking some time to himself when he hears something outside of the module. Contacting Earth, he informs them about what he has heard, but immediately changes his mind, assuming it is just static. As the broadcasting continues, the show becomes popularized all over the world as people are excited to see Sasha's day-to-day life. Sasha learns how to garner sympathy from his audience and fascinates them into continuing to watch. Several weeks after the show had begun to air, the scientists informed Alexander that they must decrease the amount of broadcasting Sasha was doing, as he was burning through too much power. When he discusses this with Ramon, the wealthy owner informs Alexander that they would need to increase broadcasting to get the revenue they need to accelerate the rescue mission. After discussing the matter with Sasha, the Martian and Alexander agreed the best course of action was to increase the revenue. One night, while having dinner, Sasha begins to hear a high-frequency noise that makes him grab his head in pain. A few minutes later, the sound stops, and he begins to see a bright light all around him and hears his mother's voice as if he was young again. As the days go by, Sasha's products begin to hold a different tone, as he begins to tell his audience that he has been able to hear something ever since he arrived, believing that he was not alone on Mars. This new behavior worries both Alexander and his therapist, Anna. One night, while he is having his session with Anna, Sasha tells her his theory that Mars might not even exist, telling her that humanity might have created it from its imagination. Anna attempts to tell Sasha that the things he was seeing and hearing were just a figment of his imagination, his mind trying to acclimate to his isolated state. Despite what his rescue team thinks, Sasha is sure about what he has been hearing, believing that he is not alone on Mars. When he is alone, Sasha begins to get flashbacks of all the conversations he had as they run through his head like a movie. A few days later, Sasha never shows up to the scheduled broadcasting, which worries both Anna and Alexander. Realizing that they need to make the show more appealing to the public, Ramon decides to escalate the show to its main event, telling the head secretary that all previous broadcasting was just preparation for this. The head secretary then communicates with Sasha about creating a brand that Sasha would be able to market. Anna noticed the overexertion was taking a toll on Sasha's mind, which she consistently worried about, and informed Alexander. One night, on her way home, Anna notices changes in the recordings and suspects her boyfriend, Peter, who was the head of connections of the mission and jealous of Sasha and her relationship, was tampering with the information they received from the Martian. When she gets home, Anna confronts Peter about the incident until he finally caves in and admits he too had noticed the same sounds Sasha had. Meanwhile, on Mars, Sasha, convinced that what he is seeing is real, attempts to chase after the entity by using the rover, but only ends up accidentally driving it off the ledge. The electrical surges coming from outside begin to create static that makes Sasha hold his head and scream in pain, blood running down his ears before he passes out. Back on Earth, Alexander speaks to the head of secretary to finally initiate the rescue mission, but the relentless man informs Alexander that the mission has already been shut down and that Sasha was an unfortunate unfortunate casualty. Devastated by what he had heard, Alexander rushes to speak to Raymond and tells him that everything they had been doing to bring back Sasha had been in vain, explaining the secretary's words. Seeming unconcerned, Raymond tells Alexander to wait until the following day, as he believes it would be a better one, and walks away. Raymond, who had grown tired of the secretary's greed, had orchestrated a ruse that would frame him as a fraudulent man. During broadcasting, government officials storm into the facility and arrest the entire staff after a sudden broadcasting is released while the host is pretending to be Sasha by using a green screen. The news initiated massive public outroar as people worldwide felt as if they had been scammed. Alexander is devastated about the news he would have to tell his friend, saddened that he would never be able to keep his promise of bringing Sasha back to Earth. After the elaborate scam is revealed, the head secretary is arrested after being framed as the mastermind of the whole thing. The reports claimed that while being unable to properly finalize the Mars mission, the secretary had attempted to falsely orchestrate a media skim to trick the masses. Meanwhile, Alexander realizes that he must inform his friend about what has happened and attempts to force his way through the heavily guarded institute, but he is severely hurt in the process. Nursing his fetal wound, Alexander makes contact with Sasha and greets his friend with a somber look. Alexander tells Sasha that they have lost their humanity on Earth, as they have deemed that he doesn't exist. He tells him that there was no module or mission to Mars. Sasha had died a few months ago in an unforeseen training accident. The last thing Sasha tells his friend is that he does exist before the module on Mars explodes. On the red planet, we see Sasha dressed in his suit, walking the sandy terrain. He climbs a very steep and rocky mountain until he reaches the very top, where a swirling blue light is seen forming around him. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our video. Watch the next recaps on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.